The gondola stopped with a sound, like something enormous deciding it was done. One moment we were swaying through cold mountain air above Whistler, the world below reduced to ski runs and parking lots, and the tiny dots of people who had made better life choices than us. The next, everything just stopped. The cabin shuddered once. The cable above us flexed and went still, and Neve Callahan, my best friend of 4 years, grabbed my hand with both of hers and said nothing at all, which was worse than anything she could have said. I looked at her. Her face had gone the color of February sky. Neve, don't. Her voice came out flat and tight. Don't do the thing where you make it funny. I wasn't going to. You were absolutely going to. Outside, wind dragged itself across the glass. We were somewhere between the two peaks, the highest point of the Peak 2 peak. I was fairly sure, which meant we were hanging approximately 800 meters above a valley floor. I could no longer see through the cloud that had rolled in off the mountains in the last 20 minutes. There were 8 other people in the gondola. A couple near the back had gone very quiet. A kid pressed his nose to the window and said it looked like we were in heaven. His mother said that was nice, in the voice of someone calculating odds. I should explain what we were doing there. Neve had insisted on taking the gondola before we drove to Kelowna for her brother Hugo's engagement party. Her idea, her insistence, delivered over Tim Hortons at 6 in the morning when I'd still been half asleep in the passenger seat of her Subaru. You have to see it, she'd said. The view up there in October is insane. I'd pointed out that it was also October in Vancouver, which meant we both knew what clouds looked like. She'd handed me a double-double and told me to stop being difficult. So here we were. Being not difficult, 800 meters above excellent regret. My name is Jasper Holt, 29, sound designer at a small post-production studio on Granville Island. I make a living arranging the noises in other people's stories, so they feel real. The creak of a door just before something goes wrong, the specific silence of an empty house, rain that sounds like grief. I notice things by trade, which is probably why I'd noticed, for the better part of 2 years, that Neve was a problem for me. Not a bad problem, the kind that starts quiet and gets loud slowly. She was 27 and a landscape architect who somehow made municipal parks sound like philosophy when she talked about them. She had a laugh that arrived before the joke did, and a stubbornness about font choices that had once kept a table of us debating menu design for 45 minutes. She wore her dark hair in a braid on working days and down on weekends, and I had learned, embarrassingly early, which version of the week it was just by which version of her walked in. She'd been my emergency contact since year 2, and I'd been hers since the night her apartment flooded, and she sat on my couch, eating crackers and peanut butter, and said, "I'm putting you down. I don't have anyone else in this city." I'd told her that was a sad reason. She'd said it was a practical one. Then she'd stolen my blanket and fallen asleep, watching a documentary about bridges, which I'd thought was fitting. I had rules. I'd had them since around month 6, when I caught myself memorizing the way she stirred coffee, counterclock 3 times every single time, and decided that was a man standing too close to a ledge. So, rules. Best friends did not keep catalogs of each other's habits. Best friends did not invent reasons to extend goodbyes. Best friends did not replay a 2-second moment where her hand had brushed their forearm and wonder whether it had meant anything. The gondola swayed. Neve's grip on my hand tightened. "They do this," I said. "Mechanical check or weather. They stop it, confirm everything's fine, start it again. The whole thing is built for this." I knew this because I'd looked it up immediately on my phone the second we'd lurched to a stop, because I too was not completely calm, and I expressed this by researching instead of showing it. "How long?" she asked. "Could be 10 minutes, could be longer." She nodded. Her thumb moved once over my knuckle, which I didn't think she noticed she was doing. "You're afraid of heights," I said. I hadn't forgotten this. I had simply underweighted it. "I thought the enclosed space would help," she admitted. "Did it?" She looked at me sideways, less than I'd hoped. We stood like that for a while. The kid at the window found a game on his tablet. The quiet couple in the back resumed talking in low voices. The mountain outside disappeared completely behind cloud, and what was left was just this small room and the sound of wind and Neve's hand in mine and the slow realization that I had been in love with her long enough that it had become part of my internal weather. I should have let go. Practically speaking, we were past the worst of it. She was breathing normally, and holding her hand at this point had shifted from comfort into something that felt less like first aid and more like honesty. I didn't let go. She tilted her head back against the glass. "If this is how I go," she said, "I want my plants to go to someone who actually talks to them, not ironically. I'll put it in the group chat. Jasper. I'll make a formal request. I'll use a subject line." She almost smiled. "What about you if this is it?" "I've made peace." "You've made peace?" "Professionally, yes. My last project was a pharmaceutical ad where the sound of the pill bottle was designed to feel like hope. Good work. I'm okay with that being the legacy." Now she did smile, and it came out shaky. The gondola gave a small shudder as the wind changed direction, and she turned toward me without thinking, both hands closing around mine the way you'd hold something you didn't want to drop. "Jasper," she said, "I need to tell you something." "Okay." The wind hit the cabin hard. She flinched and held on, and when the shaking settled, she said it quietly, and all at once, like it had been waiting at the back of her throat for a while, and the altitude had made it too heavy to carry. "I think I'm in love with you." The sentence landed somewhere behind my sternum. And I know this is the absolute worst time, or maybe the only time, I don't know. But if we don't make it down from here, I didn't want you to not know. Because you'd have not known, and that seems worse somehow. She was still holding my hand. She hadn't looked away. I had rehearsed the version of this moment that lived in the back of my head. The one where I said something easy, and she laughed and everything stayed intact. I'd rehearsed it so many times it had practically become a reflex. I didn't use it. "You think," I said. She blinked. "What?" "You said you think you're in love with me." "Jasper." "I'm not correcting you, I'm asking." She stared at me. The cloud outside had gone from gray to a pale, diffuse white, like the mountain had swallowed the sun and was thinking about giving it back. "No," she said quietly, "not think, I know." I exhaled. "Okay," I said. "Okay. I'm trying not to say something that comes out wrong at 800 meters." Something moved through her expression, relief or fear, both wearing the same face. "Say it anyway." "I've been in love with you since you put my name down as your emergency contact and then went to sleep on my couch," I said. "Possibly before, definitely before. I just needed the couch to confirm it." Neve's lips parted. Neither of us said anything. The gondola hummed around us, and somewhere below the cloud, the valley was still there, being a valley, unaware of what was happening above it. Then the intercom crackled. A voice with the practiced calm of someone trained specifically to sound like nothing. "Was wrong," said they appreciated our patience, that they were conducting a routine weather hold, and that they expected to resume in approximately 15 minutes. Neve looked at the speaker, then at me. "Routine weather hold," she repeated. "Told you." She laughed once, surprised by it. Then she covered her face with one hand and breathed. When she dropped it, her eyes were bright. "I meant it," she said. "Not a question." "I know you did. This doesn't have to be. I'm not asking you to." "Neve." She stopped. "I'm not going anywhere." She looked at me for a long moment. Then slowly, she leaned her head against my shoulder. I put my arm around her because I wanted to. Because she let me. Because the cable was holding, and the worst-case version of the last 20 minutes had not come to pass. We started moving again 11 minutes later. The cabin came back to life. The couple in the back exhaled audibly. The kid cheered. The cloud broke apart below us like it had been waiting for the right moment, and there was Whistler, spread out and absurdly beautiful, all green and gray and early October gold. Neve stood beside me with her shoulder against mine, and neither of us spoke for the rest of the ride down. At the base, with solid ground under us and the gondola already becoming a story, Neve bought us both hot chocolates from the chalet and handed me mine without meeting my eyes. The cup was too hot. I held it anyway. "Hugo's going to ask," she said finally. We were sitting on a bench outside the rental lockers, watching a retriever argue with a puddle. About? About us, he always asks. She paused. He's been asking for 2 years. What do you usually tell him? She wrapped both hands around her cup. That you're just my friend. I absorbed that. And now? I asked. She looked at the dog. The dog lost the argument with the puddle. I don't know yet, she said. I nodded. That was honest. I could work with honest. The drive from Whistler to Kelowna was 4 hours, most of it on Highway 97 through the Thompson-Okanagan, where the landscape shifts from mountain to desert almost rudely fast. Neve drove because she always drove. She said I treated GPS as a suggestion, and I watched the terrain change through the window, noticing sounds the way I noticed everything, the different pitch of wind at different elevations, the way interior BC silence is drier than coastal silence. We talked about everything except the gondola. Hugo's engagement party was at a winery on the east side of Kelowna, the kind with string lights on the pergola and a view of Okanagan Lake that made everyone's phone come out at once. Hugo was 40 minutes late to his own party because Hugo had always treated time as a creative medium. His fiancée, a sharp and unflappable woman named Dara, told us she'd decided to find this charming. Neve went to find Dara immediately. I went to find something to do with my hands and found a charcuterie station, which was sufficient. For the first hour, Neve and I orbited each other through the party the way we usually did at events, always aware of where the other one was, occasionally meeting across a room with expressions that summarized our respective conversations without requiring words. She mouthed at me at one point, Hugo's uncle is explaining crypto. I mouthed back, I will create a diversion. She shook her head and went back to nodding. Then a man named Brennan, introduced to me as a colleague of Hugo's, from his engineering firm, stationed himself beside Neve near the wine table and did not leave. He was perfectly fine, Brennan. Good jaw. Competent small talk. He made Neve laugh twice in 10 minutes, and I noticed it because I noticed too much. And then I noticed that I was noticed, which felt undignified. At some point, Hugo materialized at my elbow with a glass of Okanagan Pinot Noir and the expression of someone who'd been saving something. She's been looking for you all night, he said. I looked at the wine. She's been talking to Brennan. That's how you know she's looking for you. She talks to other people when she's thinking about you. He sounded deeply certain of this. How long have you two been doing this? Doing what? This. He gestured between me and the spot across the room where Neve was standing. This very loud nothing. I didn't answer. Hugo nodded as if I had. Later, Neve found me near the edge of the pergola, where the string lights thinned out and the lake was a dark shape in the dark. Brennan asked for my number, she said. What did you say? She looked at the water. I said I was seeing someone. My grip tightened on my glass. Is that true? I asked. She turned to me. The light from the pergola caught the side of her face, the small silver earring she'd put in that morning, the way her mouth was pressed flat like she was holding something in. I don't know what the rules are right now, she said. I said it because I wanted it to be true. Neve. But I also, she stopped, started again. I need you to know that I'm scared, not of the gondola, of this, of what happens if we're wrong about this, of what happens to. She gestured between us, and there was nothing casual in it. All of this, what we already have. I set my glass down on the railing. I know, I said. I've been scared of it for 2 years. She exhaled sharply. 2 years you never. You were worth more to me as a friend than I was worth to myself as someone in love with you. I looked at her. That math doesn't work anymore. Neve was quiet for a long moment. The lake moved in darkness below us. Somewhere inside the party, someone put on music and a few people made sounds that meant the dancing portion of the evening was beginning without anyone's explicit consent. I've been offered a position, she said. In Toronto. 6-month contract starts January. Urban green space revitalization across 3 boroughs, the kind of project that doesn't come around often. I hadn't known. She hadn't told me, which meant she'd been sitting with it alone, which meant she hadn't known how to say it yet. Are you going? I asked. She looked at me steadily. I hadn't decided. And now? I still haven't decided, she said. But now I'm deciding for different reasons. I stepped closer slowly, giving her every chance to say stop. She didn't. I'm not asking you to stay, I said. I wouldn't do that. What are you asking? I'm asking if you meant it. The gondola, not the fear part, the underneath part. Her eyes filled, which she clearly hadn't planned, and she blinked once and lifted her chin. Yes, she said. The underneath part. Yes. I touched her face the way I'd wanted to for longer than felt reasonable to admit. She didn't move. Her hand came up and held my wrist, not pulling, just holding, like she wanted to know I was real and solid and not going anywhere. She kissed me, or I kissed her. Later we could not agree on who had moved first, and this became its own small recurring argument that I loved. And when Hugo found us 20 minutes later, he said absolutely nothing, just handed us each a full glass of wine and walked away humming. Neve took the Toronto contract. She told me on a Tuesday in November, sitting cross-legged on my kitchen counter eating takeout ramen from a place on Main Street we'd been going to since we met. She decided, she said, it was the right project. 6 months wasn't forever. Vancouver wasn't going anywhere. I had not asked her to turn it down, not once, because I'd known, from the moment she described the project, with that particular light in her voice, that it was something she needed, and wanting to keep her close was not a better reason than that. She left in January. We figured out the rest from a distance, which was harder than either of us pretended and easier than either of us feared. She sent me field recordings from Toronto. The specific sound of early morning in Kensington Market, the way ice moved on Lake Ontario in February, because she knew what I collected. I sent her terrible one-line reviews of local parks because she'd asked me to be her critical eye. She came back in June. I picked her up from YVR on a Thursday evening, late flight, rain on the windshield the way it only rains in Vancouver, which is to say constantly and without apology. She came through arrivals with her big green duffel and the expression of someone who hadn't slept on the plane and was completely unbothered by it. She stopped when she saw me. Then she put down the duffel and walked over and put her arms around me and said into my shoulder, I missed you so much it was embarrassing. I held her with the airport moving around us. How embarrassing, I said. I told Hugo. She pulled back, he said obviously. Smart man, Hugo. She picked up her duffel. Her eyes were tired and clear, and she was looking at me the way she'd looked at me on the gondola, like she was sure. Take me home, she asked. We went back to Whistler the following September. Neve's idea again, which I noted. She'd been back 9 months and the Toronto position had become a portfolio piece and a story she told at dinner parties. Hugo and Dara had bought a place in Kelowna. The retriever we'd watched argue with a puddle had, according to Neve's sources, developed a complex relationship with garden hoses. The peak-to-peak gondola was running clear and cold when we got on. October again, the mountains going rust and gold, the sky that particular blue that only existed above the cloud line. Same bench we'd stood near. Different light. Neve reached for my hand before we'd even cleared the first tower. I looked at her. She was watching the mountains go past, easy and calm, not white-knuckled, just holding my hand because she wanted to. Not scared this time, I asked. Still a little, she said, but that's different now. The gondola swung gently between peaks. Below us, the valley was tiny and perfect. The cable held. She turned and looked at me with the mountains behind her, no emergency underneath the moment, nothing to blame it on but the truth. The cable holding, and the day clear, and everything still moving. I love you, she said. Not because the gondola had stopped, not because the sky was falling, or disaster had given her permission to be honest, just because it was true, and she'd chosen to say it, and the air was cold, and we were still going. I brought her hand up and pressed my mouth to her knuckles. If we make it down, I said, I'm taking you to that ramen place. She laughed. That's your romantic response? I've been planning it since January. That is genuinely the most romantic thing you've ever said, and I refuse to acknowledge it. Noted. She settled her head against my shoulder. The gondola moved through clear air above the valley that had once been the place she'd told me something she couldn't carry alone anymore. Below us, the mountain was the mountain. Above us, the cable held. I held her hand the whole way down.